Hi, everybody. I'm David Harrohan. I'll just quickly, before we get into it, I'll just quickly, if I can, hand over to Chris. Chris, could you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and keep it short. 20 minutes is not long, but I've had a long career within the retail real estate industry, coming up for 30 years just now. First 10 years of my career was as a civil engineer on major global projects that I worked on at the time. But I've passed through companies like Foot Locker, where I was head of real estate in Europe for Foot Locker, and then I was brought into Gap to head the Gap real estate in Europe equally. Then I went on to ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centres, CBRE, France and EMEA. And since about 8 years ago, I set up my own company to advise retailers and brands in their basically strategy and international expansion. But obviously today it's more about how to reposition their portfolio and add value to the existing platform and footprints that they have across Europe, Middle East and Africa.
And I see you're also involved with ULI, which is great to see as well, a great organization to be involved with. So thank you very much, Chris. Very briefly, that there are my details there. I'm a chartered surveyor, but also a full-time academic for the last 13 plus years at UCEM, program leader for the MSc Real Estate program. I like to focus on property investment, commercial property. That is mainly my thing. So that's me. Let's get straight in and make the most of our time we're going to look at MIPIM and MAPIC here today. And I guess, Chris, you have spent many years attending both events. Could you tell us a little bit about what your involvement has been with MIPIM to begin with?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, MIPIM started before I got into the retail sector. They started in 1990, and MIPIM is one of the many exhibitions and trade shows that is run by what used to be Reed Midem until 2021 roughly, and then it became RX France. But Reed Midem is part of Reed Exhibitions, which is a huge global organization that handles exhibitions, some 500 in about 30 different countries. So it's quite a big machine, and this particular one is no different. I've been involved on the MIPIM side more as a delegate, and on the odd occasion I've been a speaker, generally managing or discussing panel sessions. The conference itself, if you like, is and it's a conference and trade show, and it takes place in Cannes every year. It is run over 4 days, and they've pretty much fixed it to the same time every year, which is in March. And we can touch on it maybe a little bit later on. Obviously, the pandemic had an impact on that particular timing and what happens there. But to wrap it all up, I would say it is all about primarily owners and investors within the real estate environment. To give you an idea from a geography point of view, although it's a global event, the majority of delegates come from France, inevitably. The other big portion is the UK and Germany, and then you have Belgium and Italy. So essentially the real estate companies and operators within those major markets, although it is a global event, but those are where the majority of individuals come from. And the advantage of MIPIM in terms of its positioning is that they essentially target, so if we look at who attends, they target CEO levels, so C-suite individuals, senior executives, which is why it's one of the most prestigious in the industry globally. We can talk later on about maybe one or two others that we can look at as a reference, but that's really where business to business is happening. Opportunities for developers, owners, local authorities, public officials, and all the spectrum of that environment, I would say, or that ecosystem, if you like, of investors, financial institutions, and owners. So that would be the starting point, David.
Great. So it was held this year between the 14th and 17th of March, and I can see from their website that next year they've already put in the dates for the 12th and 5th to the 15th of March next year. I personally always think of MIPIM as the event down in Cannes, but it has been in the UK previously. There is an Asia Summit, MIPIM Asia Summit, which I have to admit I really have limited knowledge of. And then I believe there is a new event for a version of it that's happening in New York as well in November, the 29th to 30th of November, which is an interesting development to see there, that it is growing. For those who, I had to actually check this. I have to admit, MIPIM, what does it stand for? Le Marché International des Professionnels de l'Immobilier. I'm not too sure. I've been to the event and I never stopped to think what actually does it stand for. So I had to check that one. So I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that. But the event, I see it as there's three aspects to it. There's a large more than one, but a large conference center with large exhibition halls that you can attend, and it's brilliant to see who's there and what they're promoting. As you say, there's investors, corporate end users, local authorities, real estate professionals, and for the time I was there, I saw some universities. Interestingly, some universities from America with smaller stands there, but they were there. So a fascinating place to visit in terms of the exhibition halls and who's there and what they're promoting. There are then great networking events that are organized both inside the conference center, but then also there's a huge amount of networking that happens outside during the day and in the evening. As you say, the caliber of people there. It's an extraordinary event. You will casually bump into very significant people there. It's an unusual event. You get such exposure to people who you wouldn't simply bump into normally. That's what makes it so special. And as you say, they're from across Europe. I've seen a representation from Turkey as well. In the year I was there was a strong Russian presence, but I've heard since that because of all that's going on in recent times, Russia has shied away from being present there. Hopefully things will resolve themselves soon. I can see that recent news reports, China is trying to broker a peace agreement. I hope that happens soon in terms of resolving things, and hopefully we can see people back again. There are various conferences, various sessions that happen during those 4 days. I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts on what are the trending themes that you've seen in recent times. I appreciate that you may not have been to this one, but I suspect a lot of it is to do with sustainability and how to protect and improve the underlying characteristics of investments in certain sectors. So I'll be intrigued to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, I can see that there's a question there. How often is it held? It's held, as you say, every March in Cannes. I've kind of touched on it. What, from your point of view, having been to these annual events, what benefits have you seen from attending in person?
Well, I think the overarching point that I would make for anybody wishing to attend or thinking of conferences, trade shows, these kind of events is, especially on the back of the pandemic, despite what people think, we need to get back together. And one of the easiest ways of doing it is not just the conferences themselves and the topics and discussions, but ironically and maybe interestingly, it's around the cocktails and the networking events. So it's not just about drinking beer, wine, champagne, whatever, but it's the fact that you do, to your point, David, you bump into people that you may not otherwise have bumped into. Now, inevitably not. There are those who are introverts and there are those who are extroverts. People have more difficulty, depending on the group you belong to engage sporadically with other people that you don't really know, but which is why it's good to go with somebody else. It also helps to kind of broker a relationship. But what these events in person do is they allow you to reconnect not only with the industry, but with individuals. And to your point about what is the value, what you get out of it, Well, on the one hand, and maybe to the more junior population who might be listening to this, business cards are still very much used and very important. I know people have their QR codes and the whole digital formats, but those of us of a certain generation, we like our business cards. So always make sure that your business cards, A, are up to date, and B, are ready, and C, don't forget to take them with you. The number of people, even at senior level, who I've seen forget to take their business cards, it's pretty crazy. So what you come away with, business cards, but then how do you use the business cards? Because having them and collecting them is not what it's about. So on the one hand, you'd understand internationally, if not globally, what are the issues going on, and I'll touch on those just now. Over the years, like anything, it's about what are the latest trends and what are the latest issues going on in the industry. Now, just picking out a few of them, because although I didn't go this year, I do have clients who are there, and I've been able to understand some of the background and issues. Sustainability and ESG is an important one, but whenever a conference is put on, those of us who attend these regularly, it's important not to rehash the same thing that you can read in a newspaper or article or magazine. You've got to come with solutions. This is what we're doing on the ESG front. This is what we're doing about achieving net zero carbon. This is what we're doing about social aspect of the ESG component. What are the solutions that others are using, have created or found that help you in your business? That's what these things are really, really important for. And then in terms of the sustainability, as an example, we're now not so much at the 36,000 foot level. We're now at the, okay, how does legislation work? How does, who pays for what between tenants and owners or landlords? What is the return on the investment? How can I look in this and make my asset more valuable going forward? So we're down at really not so much granular level, but that's the way these things step through in the process. So that's one of the areas, is indeed sustainability and ESG, but it's like, what are we doing now to hit those 2030 targets? Which is very different from a broader conversation we had maybe 2 or 3 years ago. The other one is, and this particular one is, I guess, timing. You always look at what's happening at that moment in time. And as we know, if we've listened to the news, we've had the SVB collapse, the Silicon Valley Bank, and the impact of that. And then this week or last week into this week, the aspect of Credit Suisse and UBS stepping in, and the Swiss government. So they're always looking at issues that are really current, and there was a lot of conversation around that. I know that from people I've spoken to, of how the banking and financial institution might be impacted. Because remember, those of us who are maybe older or not so old, 2008 is not that far away, and what happened with Lehman Brothers, that whole cascading. Now, this is a whole different story. It's not that, but it's how do those actual geopolitical issues, you've talked about Ukraine and about Russia, those are things which are energetic costs or energy costs that are pushing through, and how those impact the service charges. So those kind of things are discussed. So those are a few of the items. And then inflation has been a big conversation as well, from what I hear at MIPIM as well, but it didn't get to the surface, as it were. It was there as an undercurrent of a conversation. Then there were the more bigger issues being looked at. So those are a few of the thoughts, David.
Thank you. The really interesting points raised there. Sentiment is something, from speaking to those that were there, did they feel that there was a buzz, or was it somewhat subdued, given that there is such global concerns going on, as you say, in the banking sector and the political uncertainty? Was there sense that it's funny, I was chatting to there's another event, the Expo Real, that happens also it happened last year, and I asked a colleague who attended that event in Germany, and I was expecting there for it to be a very downbeat event, but actually there was a bit of a buzz and talk of looking to the future. So is there a sense that sentiment at MIPIM was somewhat subdued, or was there some positivity there?
No, it was a real buzz, from what I understand. And if you look at the numbers, I haven't seen the official figures, but they peaked a few years ago, maybe 2017, 18, I don't know the exact year, at about 27,000 delegates. In 2022, last year, it was about 23,000 maybe. And they've started picking up again. So, and I'd read that they were expecting a record number. I don't know if that was going to surpass the 27,000, but if by numbers alone, it shows that there is an appetite for attending these events. The sentiment point which you raised, over the past few years, there's actually been a very positive sentiment. You touched on ULI, of which I have the privilege of being a global governing trustee of ULI, and every month we talk about what's going on in the industry. I'm the only representative of the retail sector, so I'm very privileged amongst the 40 or so global governing trustees. So we do talk about and get feedback. I get real live feedback from my peers as to what is happening. And over time, we've gone from a morose type conversation on a monthly basis of, you know, the challenges and the issues and everything else to, okay, let's start moving forward. Let's build this going forward. So it has become a very much more positive real estate sector, let's say, less about smaller components of that, which maybe have exceeded their lifetime. Sort of logistics, you'll recall, you know, a few years ago, logistics was the hot thing to invest in and be a part of, but now we know more about, you know, where logistic companies are challenged, how to redo or rework that industry to be more successful. But no, it is a very positive environment, the way people are looking at things. Cautious, I would say cautiously optimistic would be the word I guess I'd use.
That's a real nice way of putting it. What, for somebody who hasn't been to the event before, is there advice or any kind of good tips to suggest to them in ahead of attending?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's more, this should be taken really seriously for MIPIM, perhaps less so for MAPIC, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's a similar sort of thing. Plan, plan, plan. You cannot go to these events last minute, and you certainly cannot go to MIPIM last minute. Cannes is not that big a place. It's a wonderful place to be, especially if the sun's out, even in March or indeed in November, December for MAPIC. But if you don't plan in advance, which means register, then you don't get a hotel that is anywhere close to the event itself. You could be literally an hour and a half away. Some people even go 2 hours away, 2.5 hours to Marseille just to have somewhere to be, which is just impossible in terms of, you know, efficient working. You can't do cocktails in the evenings and so on. So it's about planning, preparing properly for the event, then looking on the website. They've got excellent platforms in terms of who's attending, who you might want to meet up with, how to connect with them beforehand, and then set up meetings. A number of people who over the years I've seen walking through the streets of Cannes or wherever, or even in the corridors, they haven't set up meetings. They're trying to get meetings. It's too late. So I don't know how many months in advance you want to do it, because depending on your position, it's a question of getting budget approval and everything else, because none of this is cheap between the entry, travel and accommodation. But it's about planning, and it's about knowing who you want to meet and perhaps what your outcomes are going to be. I've always had specific outcomes for every event that I go to, in terms of what I want to get out of it and who I expect to see, or at least get closer to. So I can't underestimate the importance of planning and serious planning. So really look at the whole process, the whole profile, look at which cocktails you want to get into, which events, because many of these are free. You can just turn up to these stands. They're not, there are a few that are closed. And by the way, I guess, David, we should tell those who want to choose between MIPIM and MAPIC that MIPIM is where all the yachts and super yachts and boats and everything else are. So, you know, if you work your corner, you can get invited onto one of these luxury boats, and trust me, it is worth the selfie, if nothing else. MAPIC is a lot more subdued, but MIPIM still, it's who's got the biggest one.
It's always a great point of discussion as to who's turned up with what, in terms of the both the stands can be incredibly impressive, but also the yachts as well. So those yacht events are all private events, by invitation only. So yeah, you need to forward plan in that respect. Then also being there on those 3-4 days, the practicalities. This year, I believe the weather was very changeable. So have the clothing and be prepared for, or make life as comfortable as it can be. It's a full-on event. You're going to be busy all day, moving around, meeting people. So yeah, do plan.
So ladies, don't wear high heels and stilettos and whatever. You'll kill your feet. After a few hours, get some nice comfortable shoes. Absolutely. Yeah.
You've just touched on
this is very big. It's a big space.
It's a huge space. That you've just touched on something there. I've heard reference to the blue suits, the predominance of men in suits there. Is there a change in terms of better gender balance there? Are we seeing more of a mix of people there, or is it very dominated by the kind of cliched middle-aged white guy sort of thing? Is it that sort of thing, or is it really quite diverse? Is it a very accessible event?
It's changing. I mean, it is accessible, but inevitably, and I don't think that'll ever change, unfortunately, for those who want to bang their heads against that. It'll always be a male-dominated environment, although there are more CEOs, there are more senior executives, more C-suite women, for example. Not that much in the way of color, to be perfectly honest, but I think that's a global thing as well, outside of the US. So from a dress sense point of view, it's a little bit more relaxed. So you probably won't see many CEOs without a tie, although there are a few that they'll still have their jacket, but they won't necessarily wear a tie. It's slowly becoming a little bit more open, as it were. But because people are there to do business, it's more about let's get the business done as opposed to how you're dressed.
Yeah. But it's good to hear that there's it's changing in that sense. And then just touching on that, how has it adapted to address changing industry issues, including the pandemic? Have you any sense of how it's evolving, or is it following a set pattern every year?
It's pretty much a set pattern every year, unlike MAPIC, which has kind of morphed into different areas. I would say overall, there's a similar pattern of meetings, keynotes, conferences, and so on, following the themes of the day or the time. So I didn't touch earlier on cities, but cities has been a big topic as well over the past 5, probably 6 years. What are the reference cities around the globe? Is it Eindhoven which is smaller, and how it's been transforming, or is it Singapore, which is always a reference that we use? And obviously there's London, there's Paris, there's Milan. So it's about the theme and the topics that are going through, but generally speaking, it's a similar format. Now, the one time when it did change was, I guess it would have been 2020 from memory, where because in France anyway, we were still in lockdown. Lockdown was lifted in June, so it was a case of no MIPIM, but they did a hybrid event in September, I think it was, of 2020, where using certain venues, and it was just in Paris, where it was done as a hybrid concept. So essentially, I think 1,500 individuals physically in Paris, and then 7,000 worldwide were able to log on to the live streaming that was being done. So from a practical point of view, that was what they were doing, but they've now gone back obviously to full physical in-person presence.
Which, as you say, this is a people industry. It's great to see. I'm very mindful of time. We better spend a bit more time on MAPIC as well, if you don't mind. Sure. And I think you've been heavily involved with MAPIC. Can you tell me about your experiences with MAPIC and tell us how it differs from MIPIM?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been heavily involved in MAPIC. I am a steering committee member and have been for, I forget, since when they first invited me to be a part of that. And then as time went by, for the past 12 or 14 years, I've been Master of Ceremony. So I'm very involved in everything from conference to delivery on the day, mainly as MC, Master of Ceremony in Cannes itself, but I've done MAPIC Italy a couple of times, and I did MAPIC China when they launched China back in 2015, I think it is. So been very close to the structure, the process, and everything else happening in there. The main difference is it is a retail real estate conference and trade show. And interestingly, a lot of people don't know this, but it started out more as a trade show and less of a conference. The conferences, I'll be honest, were pretty poor back in the day. And over time, they've understood that doing conferences, as many of us who are involved in them from the grassroots up, is a very different thing from a trade show. So marrying the two together and making them successful was a big challenge initially, and it's public, so it's not an issue. But ICSC, when I was MD of ICSC, sought to help MAPIC to develop their conference side. Sadly, it didn't, well, sadly, I don't know, but it didn't work out for different reasons. Bearing in mind, ICSC is a not-for-profit and MAPIC is for profit, so it's kind of difficult to marry the two together. But on that, being a retail roller skate event, it is smaller. So MAPIC, as I said, MIPIM was about 27,000, it maxed out. MAPIC probably maxed out at about 9,500, 10,000 pre-pandemic. So it's a smaller event, but it really attracts globally all those who are involved in the retail real estate sector. Anything from obviously shopping centers to high streets to retailers to brands. And then over time, which I'll touch on because we don't have much time on to develop all these, it has developed the food and beverage aspect, leisure aspect, outlets as well. We had a digital summit, which I helped launch back in the day. So really following the trends of the time and then seeing how much bigger or smaller they had to be. So unlike MIPIM rather, MAPIC has more scope, I would say, to enlarge its footprint and platform, not physically, but in terms of topics and areas to be covered off. So it's been really interesting. And also, I think we cover off who attends. At MAPIC, it's less, there are CEOs, there are C-suite individuals, but you generally would go down to, for want of a better positioning, manager level. So those who have a responsibility, but they're not necessarily director or senior director or SVP or anything like that. So it's a broader community. However, and then I'll finish on that, the demographics, I would say, of the group, depending on the real challenges. So when retailers were not expanding, you saw a lot less retailers, which was sad because the stands were there and they were, the landlords and owners were expecting to meet up with retailers, but retailers chose not to go because they're not expanding. So what's the point having a conversation? Now it's been a lot more about specific areas of the industry. So digital native brands, there's a whole thing around them, new retailers and brands, new concepts, and various other things, and then innovation, digital platforms, etc. So it's able to create zones within the environment to focus on those particular areas. But then the main conference still continues, and that's the one that I normally lead as MC.
Yeah, the whole area of innovation and technology, changing consumer behaviors is a huge thing from recollection from the last MAPIC event I was at, and how shopping centres can counter the move, and with the pandemic, the move, it was happening, but the pace of move to online shopping increased. So how can shopping centres still draw people and keep the footfall going? That's hugely important. So MAPIC is a great event to draw people in and give ideas and share them out in a similar spirit as MIPIM. And so I expect we've covered what are the benefits of attending MIPIM. I would see MAPIC the same sort of benefits, and likewise it's at the same conference center, so same advice in terms of attending to plan ahead.
If I can just jump in there, I think one of the interesting aspects, and hopefully people will understand this, because in retail we like to think that we're much more fun than the financial and investor groups. So the ones that when I used to run CBRE retail department in France, for example, and people came from different parts of the world through the CBRE network, and we'd all be there, and some would come up to me and say, Chris, okay, so this is my first MAPIC, what should I do? My comment to them all the time was, there are so many cocktail parties and events that are absolutely cool, they're a lot of fun. Maybe less so, they've been toned down a little, but make sure that you pace yourself. So you don't want to get totally drunk, maybe, or have too much
overindulge.
Overindulge, exactly. That's a better way of putting it, because you have, back in those days, it was a 3-day event, as opposed to now it's 2 days. So that's about pacing yourself, just making sure that you are fit for business the following day, because the parties can be rather, or even just cocktails, they're not parties, can be long. You can have great conversations, meet some cool people, have a lot of fun. But that's one aspect to be very wary of.
Very careful of, and safety as well.